Thanks all for coming. I know a lot of you had a long night and didn't get much sleep, including some from our office as well. So thanks a lot for joining us here and good afternoon. With perspective comes wisdom. That's what people say. And we have a little bit of perspective now, at least one day's worth, having slept on all of this overnight. And I think we need to just remind ourselves what we just pulled off here as a state. All elections are difficult and challenging, but this was one that we had to administer during a once-in-a-century pandemic. And I think everyone up and down the system performed nearly flawlessly, and that's to a lot of people's credit. There are always a lot of moving parts in an election, and harmonizing them is always difficult. But this year, people really took the extra step, particularly where they often weren't physically in their offices or weren't even reunited or working alongside their colleagues. That was the case in our office as well. So there were those logistical limitations as well. And yet we pulled off, I think, a textbook election in the state of Minnesota. We adapted and adjusted by emphasizing voting from home early on, starting in the spring and summer, and Minnesotans took to that option in breathtaking and record-shattering numbers. There's no question about that. People really took seriously the opportunity this year to vote in different ways. And going forward into the future, it will be interesting to see whether they go back to their old, more traditional ways of voting or continue on voting by absentee, either in person or from home. At the polling place, what we heard about overall was consistent with what I saw yesterday. Obviously, what I saw is only anecdotal. It's only a sliver of what was happening out there, but some staff members and I went to a number of polling places, mostly in the metro area, kind of the 494, 694 corridor, trying to balance East-West Metro, West Metro, urban, suburban, and we got a pretty good taste of what was going on. And what we saw was what was consistent with what we heard from our partners in counties and cities all over Minnesota, namely really good traffic management. I don't just mean cars and vehicles, I mean traffic of people, particularly at peak times. Sufficient quantities and quality of PPE and supplies up and down. People were really impressed with the materials that they got, and they felt safe, and they felt that it was a secure space in the polling place. No shortage of election judges. Sometimes it's the dog that doesn't bark that is particularly noteworthy, and that was the case here. Many of you know during the primary season, other states faced really disastrous outcomes when it came to polling places because of chronic and last-minute understaffing. That accounted for a lot of the lines, and we did not have that problem in Minnesota, due in large part to the work of many people up and down the system. Folks from our office, yes, urging on our colleagues and partners in the counties and cities, but really they're the ones who did the lion's share of the work and did a fantastic job filling holes, working out contingencies, seeing around corners, so to speak. I know this seems like a minor logistical issue in the sweep of things, but believe me, had we had polling place shortages like they had in other states, we would be talking very differently right now about the election that just happened yesterday. And also, I just want to say, as I've said all along, very few conflicts at polling places, both in the primary and in the general election. Truth be told, I thought there would be more. I thought there would be more conflicts or reports of conflicts about everything from masks to political apparel to allegations of voter suppression or intimidation. And we had next to none of those across the state, up and down, 87 counties. And that's a testament to the voters, to election administrators, and to the system overall. So that's something we can be proud of as well. I want to say a heartfelt thank you to all the poll workers and election staff that did a superb job of administering, again, an election in the middle of a pandemic. They really excelled, as they always do. 30,000 poll workers or election judges, that's what it takes to run an election in Minnesota. That's a small army, and I am grateful to each and every one of them who not only performed at a high level this year, but did so at some personal risk. Let's not forget, the average number at a Minnesota polling place standing alone is about 1,000 people. That was diminished this year because a lot of people chose to vote in other ways, but that's a lot of people that they're coming in contact with in the course of a day, and yet they stepped up as never before. County and city elections administrators continue to be rock stars. We have a decentralized system in Minnesota. As you know, we don't count a single ballot. We don't handle a single ballot or vote in our office. That all happens at the local level. And I can tell you that not just for weeks, but for many months, county and city elections officials have been planning for this day. The primary was a good dress rehearsal, but it was really this day that they were planning for all along. And it's been very stressful on them, very stressful. Last minute rules changes and court cases and rising COVID cases, which could have but did not spook a lot of their usual election judges. They've had to deal with a lot of change, a lot of upheaval this year, and they performed absolutely brilliantly. So I want to thank them as well. They're tremendous partners. I also want to mention the behind the scenes work of our local, state, and federal intelligence and law enforcement partners who were really vigilant against cyber threats and other threats to our system. Again, the example of a dog that doesn't bark, we would be talking very differently today about the election had those partners and those folks not been as vigilant and clever and hardworking as they were over the past, not just few months or year, but I would say 4 years since 2016. We had real-time communication with dozens of counties and with law enforcement at every level. And there is no evidence at this point, there is no evidence of any malicious attack or even attempted attack in Minnesota at this point. I say at this point because you may recall in 2016, it wasn't until months after 2016 that we learned of certain intelligence information about some things that had happened on election night. But at this time, we don't have any evidence of that. Okay, so there's a reason that our elections are the envy of the nation, and it's because I think people at every level of the system this year stepped up. Now I want to go on to the results. That's what you're really most interested in, I realize. So let's talk about the numbers and the results. I've said before that to me, for many years, since I was a kid, the election night is like the Super Bowl and the World Series combined. And I think that's the case for many of you too, or you wouldn't be covering these issues. It's an exciting, intense time every time. And to extend the sports metaphor or analogy, sometimes you need overtime or you need extra innings. And that's what we're dealing with right now when it comes to processing these results. We're exploring new territory in a complex system. And the purpose of the system this year especially is to give everyone a voice in our democracy. That's why it's designed this way. So the slow process is very much by design. I've said that over and over again, and I'm going to keep saying that. This slower than usual process is literally by design of the legislature, which, for example, gave 2 extra days after the election for all local elections administrators to count and process results, and by design of the courts, which have allowed the counting of ballots postmarked by election day, but received by November 10th to be counted in the final results. And we intend for that to happen. As you know, the equipment and the personnel and the procedures vary from county to county, and they have the discretion to report the results in different ways. We can't force them, but our office is the conduit for those results. We report them, we aggregate them, but we've known for months and have communicated to the people of Minnesota that dealing with an unprecedented number of absentee and mail-in ballots would take some time. And that's the same today. It's just as we've been saying for weeks and months. So here on midday Wednesday, we are seeing the process make its way forward. And I want to start with concrete numbers. Let's talk about overall turnout, first of all. The first thing to know about overall turnout in Minnesota is you have to know what the denominator is, right? What are you measuring against? What is the number of eligible voters in Minnesota? Those who are eligible, those who in Minnesota who are 18, citizens, residents, and not currently serving a felony sentence. Those 4. How many people that fit that category are there in Minnesota, whether they're registered or not? How many eligible voters? Obviously, the meter is always running. You have to stop somewhere. But most states, if not all states, really abide by the analysis and peg their counts to the analysis of a particular person at a particular place in this country who commands a lot of respect. His name is Michael McDonald, Professor Michael McDonald of the University of Florida, and also of the U.S. Elections Project. He and his team every year do rigorous analysis based on a variety of factors, census data and other data, to come up with what that number is at a certain point in time immediately before the election. And that number we all agree on in Minnesota is 4,118,462. 4,118,462. That's on our website as well. All this information is on the website, but I just wanted to say it for the record here. 4,118,462 posted on our website. That's the number of eligible Minnesota voters who fit the categories that I mentioned. Turnout so far, as of just before this call, is 3,216,814. 3,216,814, which, if you do the math, would come out to 78.1%, 78.1%. But keep in mind, that number will grow. We don't know by how much, but it will grow. It will grow because, as you know, there's more to come. So I want to talk about that more to come right now. And that's what's coming next. So the number of outstanding absentee ballots is currently at about 240,000. That has not changed overnight in terms of what we have posted. Now, as you know, for the first time ever, we in our office are reporting on our website the number of outstanding absentee ballots down to the Minnesota House District. That has never, to our knowledge, been done before, and I'm sure you've all figured out how to get there on our website. We will update that number later today. We don't know what time, sometime this afternoon, and on an ongoing basis. But please remember that that number has a lot of asterisks and a lot of caveats, that 240,000 number. It will never get to zero, never. That's because it likely includes many people who voted yesterday. It includes, for example, people in mail-only districts who received a ballot by mail, as everyone who's registered does in those districts or in those communities, but had no intention ever of voting and did not in fact vote. So for a variety of reasons, that number will never be zero. And the actual number is probably considerably less than 240,000. How much less? Well, we'll know that as the vote totals come in. And let me discuss the two categories of vote totals that have yet to be processed or counted. So the counties continue, obviously, to count absentee ballots. For today and tomorrow, those ballots fall into two categories. Why do I say today and tomorrow? Because the legislature expressly earlier this year said they've got 2 days after the election to count certain ballots. So they have today, Wednesday, and tomorrow, Thursday. So for today and tomorrow, the following is true. What you will see posted and added to totals in counties consists of two separate categories. Number one, what the legislature was talking about, which is stuff that was received by 8 p.m. last night, but the counties, for whatever reason, couldn't or didn't get to. And we don't know why, but they were given that extra 2 days. And so some of them are taking advantage of the extra 2 days. So category number one of things that are still being counted today and tomorrow, but not after that, are things that came in by 8 p.m. last night, but they just didn't get to yet. So that's category number one. Category number two is ballots postmarked by yesterday, but received by mail today or tomorrow. So the stuff that came in the mail today, the stuff that will come in the mail tomorrow, those also will be added to the totals on an ongoing basis. The second group, the stuff that comes in the mail today, the stuff that comes in the mail tomorrow, and for that matter, stuff that comes in the mail all the way until November 10th, Tuesday, November 10th, that will by court order be segregated. We have to do that. The court has ordered us to do that, or ordered us to arrange it with the counties, and we and they will be doing that. But both groups, both of the groups I just mentioned, will be combined for reporting purposes. The court said nothing about how we are to count those ballots. They only said we're to segregate them. So they will be combined for reporting purposes. So when you see in a particular county that they've added 1,000 more votes, that includes some combination, or could include some combination of both of those categories. The stuff that came in by 8 p.m. last night and the stuff that's coming today by mail, for example, today. So we will probably be providing two separate updates today. I mentioned this yesterday when we had our 4 p.m. meeting, probably two separate updates. And the reason for that is Hennepin County, and we really appreciate this, has already notified us that their plan is to keep counting all day today up until about 10 p.m. We didn't want to wait until 10 p.m. or after to give you the first taste of the new numbers. And so we don't want to do that. And so sometime after work hours, after presumably 5 o'clock in most counties, maybe a little bit after, sometime after that, not quite sure yet when, because this is the first day we're doing this, and we have to synchronize to some extent 87 different counties, but sometime after the close of business today, as soon as possible, we will get you that next batch of numbers, that aggregation of the next wave of numbers. We'll probably end up tonight doing a second batch that takes into account Hennepin County. It's such a large county. I think it's what, 22 or 23% of Minnesota lives in that one county. And so it's worth doing a separate batch or update after Hennepin County has come in. So that's what you should expect going forward in terms of numbers from our office. I want to say a word about recounts. It always comes up, and perhaps no more, and this year is no exception. The law in Minnesota, just to repeat, is that when a vote margin is 1/4% for a statewide contest, or 1/2% in any other contest, a candidate is entitled to request a recount at taxpayer expense. They don't need to request it, so it isn't automatic. Someone has to ask for it, but they can ask for it at government expense if it falls within that margin. So again, if it's within 1/4% on the statewide races, and on any other race, 1/2%, a party or a candidate can ask for a recount, and that will be paid for by the public. But I just have to caution that any candidate who can raise the money and wants to pay for it can ask for a recount. I think sometimes there's a misconception that if it isn't a so-called automatic recount, then there is no recount. No, there may be reasons why a candidate says, I'm just outside the threshold, or more than just outside the threshold. And if they want to pay for it, they can have a recount. So we'll see what happens here. We do a recount report the day after the election, the morning after, and we did one this morning as well, where we focus on all the current races. And I say current because the addition of the absentee ballots could change this number. It could grow the list, or I suppose it could shrink the list. But as of right now, we did the recount report. These are all the contests that would right now qualify for a taxpayer funded recount. Doesn't mean there will be one. A candidate might just say, no, I don't want to do one, even though I'm entitled to have one. But so far we have 3 state house contests that qualify, 4 county commissioner contests, 1 soil and water supervisor contest, 24 mayoral contests, 75 city council seats, 1 city clerk position, and many dozens of town supervisor positions as well. So we don't know how many of those will result in an actual recount, but a losing candidate whose margin falls within the threshold could request one, at least as of this point, as I just described. And that might change based on the counting over the coming days of absentee ballots. It might put more contests on the list, and it might in turn take more of the contests off the list as well. I want to say just a word about litigation. None so far. No new litigation so far. Our lawyers, internal and external, are checking constantly to see if we've been sued yet today, and we have not been sued yet today. So no new litigation to report. As you know, the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals contemplated the possibility of litigation by a presidential candidate. They had us and had the counties and cities segregate and set aside a pile of ballots so that a presidential candidate could seek to invalidate those ballots. I don't want to get too far into punditry here. This is more like arithmetic than punditry, but the margin in Minnesota in the presidential contest seems to foreclose that. Vice President Biden leads President Trump right now by about 229,000 votes, and there are about 240,000 outstanding absentees. I mentioned before the disclaimers and caveats about that number, though. It's probably not, almost certainly not really 240,000. It's probably a lot south of that. But just for the sake of argument, assuming that it really is 240,000, that would mean that President Trump would have to win about 95% of the outstanding absentee ballots, 95%, in order for that invalidation of that pile. Well, he would have to win them, I should say, even if they were all counted, even leaving aside invalidation of that pile. So it seems highly unlikely that would happen, at least for the reason of advancing President Trump's vote total in the state and seeking to flip the result in the state. Maybe there are other reasons, I don't know, but we haven't heard anything yet so far. So I just want to end before I take your questions where I began, which is we have a lot to be proud of in Minnesota. We have a strong voting record for a reason. We don't know yet whether we're number 1 in the country yet. I think we're poised to be, but we don't know yet whether we will be number 1 in the country in voter turnout. I think we may be, but it all depends on the votes that come in over the next few days. But regardless of whether we're number 1 or not, I think we pulled off something really extraordinary in Minnesota during a once-in-a-century pandemic, and people up and down the system should be really proud of what we've accomplished. So thanks a lot. I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Secretary Simon. We have a number of questions and gentle reminder, and thank you for folks entering in which outlet you're with. First question goes to Devin Martin. So Devin writes, with the majority of the state being red and with Biden winning it with blue, why did that happen and how does that work?
Well, I really prefer to leave to others the political punditry about why voters voted the way they did. I'm really going to defer to others on that. But, except to say Minnesota's by and large a purple state. So it's not surprising that we have a push and a pull in different directions based on the kind of office, the presidency, the legislative seats. That's all I'll say. But I'm sure others in the punditry business could offer fuller analysis.
Thank you. Next question from Mary Lahammer, PBS. Mary writes, can you explain if 100% of precincts reporting means that all the ballots, including absentee, especially absentee, are counted?
Yeah, thanks, Mary. That's something that we have been wrestling with as well, because the law is silent on that. So counties are doing it in different ways. And I might just here phone a friend and defer to our elections director and or Julie Strother, our chief of staff. We had a lot of talks about this last night. Different counties have meant different things by that 100% reporting. So David and Julie, I'm going to hand it over to you since you were immersed in these issues last night and this morning.
Thank you. To answer Mary's question, it doesn't mean that. What the 100% means is that we have results in for that precinct, which might mean we have their polling place results plus a certain number of absentees, or it might mean we have everything. And the 100% refers to the precinct actually reporting something.
Thank you, David. For those on the call, that was David Maeda, Director of Elections. We have another question from Ricardo Lopez, a Minnesota reformer. Ricardo writes, so if you could just repeat, Secretary Simon, what the voter turnout.
Yeah, sorry, if I can just, and this is Ricardo. I was striking that question since it was already answered, but my question is, does this 78.1% voter turnout include all absentee ballots that have been received? And how does that, and how did the ballots that have to be segregated factor into that 78.1% figure at this point?
No, that's a rolling total. So I think that's going to go up. In other words, as more votes are added to the total, either the things that came in before 8 p.m. last night or the things that come in today's mail or tomorrow's mail or the next day's mail, that's going to go up. So that's it's going to go up, not down, the 78.1% that we have so far.
Is it possible it'll crack 80%?
You know, I said possible. I was doing some of the number crunching earlier this morning. I think it is possible. It all depends on what comes in this week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Simon. Next question to Stephen Montemayor of the Star Tribune. Stephen writes, do you have an estimate on how many absentee ballots could now possibly arrive after the 8 p.m. Tuesday segregation cutoff that was established by last week's 8th Circuit order?
You know, that is the big question in our office, and we're all trying to read tea leaves and figure that out. I really am not sure. It depends on so many factors. I am guessing that we'll get a better sense of that after today's mail comes in 87 counties. If it's a pretty small number, it's not likely to, I mean, today and tomorrow, if the primary was any indication in August, are likely to be the high water mark. It is extremely unlikely that a number will come in at X on Monday and then it will rise on Wednesday or Thursday. That's really not likely in the aggregate number. So today and tomorrow will likely be the biggest numbers, and we'll have a sense of that. Statewide, I'm just throwing out a number, 10,000 come in, then you know that the 240 number will probably be very substantially below 240,000 over the course of the next several days. If though, 50,000 ballots come in today, that's a different story. So we just don't know. And we've gone back and forth on various theories, but we just don't know.
Thank you, Secretary Simon. Next question from Dave Org, Pioneer Press. And Dave, I will email you, but the question is about the data on outstanding absentee ballots and if we are going to have them broken down by Minnesota House District. And so I can get that answer, but do you have any broader comments about the Minnesota House District data on outstanding absentee ballots?
Yeah, and Dave, yeah, the answer is yes. We'll continue to update it down to the Minnesota, that's the most granular level at which we're updating it, which is Minnesota House District level, but we're also doing it by Senate District, Congressional District, County, and of course statewide. So yes, the update will include that division. Any comments about that? Well, other than to say it could really have an impact in at least 3 contests, because 3 are on the recount list now, but as I mentioned, depending on what else comes in, there could be contests that are added to that list, depending on how the votes go in a particular district. So it's 3 for now, but I suspect there are other legislators or legislative candidates who are anxiously looking at what those numbers will be in their districts. So it's really hard to say, and it's hard to say where they'll be distributed.
Thank you, Secretary Simon. Bear with me, everyone. We're a little sleep deprived. Kevin Featherly, Minnesota lawyer, has a question about Senate District 34. And that question is, so the spreadsheet showed that more than 3,500 absentee ballots were outstanding in SD 34. Are those numbers dropping by now? And with all of the earlier caveats about outstanding ballots, is there really much chance that those votes can still affect that race?
Well, thanks, Kevin. You know, I looked at those numbers in some other districts as well. You're right. I think the difference, as I understand it, is in Senate District 34, the incumbent is up by roughly 1,000 votes. So even if all 3,400 plus of those were truly going to come in this week, and I don't think they will, just as they won't in any particular place. Yeah, I'm not good at doing the math in my head right now, but the challenger would have to win a pretty high, very high percentage of those, it seems to me, in order to overcome that deficit. But that's just my back of the napkin math here, not having the numbers in front of me. So it depends on what the real number of outstanding absentee ballots is. It's likely, as it is everywhere, to be south, maybe considerably south of the posted number. So I don't know what that means. I wish I could tell you it'll be half or 20% or 80%. I just don't know. I think we'll have a lot more texture in a few hours, or certainly by the end of today.
Thank you, Secretary Simon. Looks like there are a couple questions that have been answered. Next question, shifting gears to political signs, from Malia at KIMT in Rochester. She writes, can you talk about campaign signs? How do residents dispose of them? And what's the time frame? And are there penalties for leaving those signs up for too long?
Well, as to how to dispose of them, I think that depends on local jurisdictions and whether corrugated plastic in most cases is recyclable. But the short answer to the timeline on disposal is Minnesota law says that there's a 10-day grace period, that any local jurisdiction that has an ordinance covering lawn signs can start enforcing that ordinance 10 days beyond the election. Now, if a jurisdiction doesn't have an ordinance, then I suppose it could stay up all winter, right? Theoretically. But if a jurisdiction does have a sign ordinance, they can start enforcing it 10 days after the election. So that's really the grace period.
Thank you. Next question, forgive me if I mispronounce your name, either Dean or Danae, you can correct me, from KNSI News in St. Cloud. She writes, do we know how many Minnesotans registered on election day? And if not, when do we expect to have that data?
It's a great question. I don't know the latest number. David Maeda might have some insight on that.
Yeah, thank you, Secretary. So the counties are entering all that statistical data today, and so it should be available within the next few days.
To put that number in perspective, though, this I do know. In the 2012 presidential race, it was in the mid 500,000s. In the 2016 presidential race, it was in the mid 300,000s. And so that number has been going down over time, probably in part due to the fact that we have no excuses absentee voting now, and we have had since the 2014 election. That's our theory. So we'll see if that trend continues. We'll know more shortly.
All right, thank you. Next question from Kevin Featherly, Minnesota lawyer. Kevin writes, wouldn't it be possible for a candidate other than a presidential candidate, or even someone else, to file suit challenging the late absentee count just based on the precedent of the 8th Circuit ruling as opposed to the letter of that ruling? And are you expecting that?
Well, you have to plan for the worst, hope for the best. So we are planning and gaming out all sorts of litigation scenarios, including people on the losing end of multiple races, or perhaps on the winning end of multiple races, trying to stop the count of those ballots. And so whether they'll do that and at what level of office they will do that, we'll see. There might be some who might draw inspiration from the 8th Circuit's language and seek to invalidate ballots that pertain to their own contests. I just don't know. But we're prepared for it if it comes.
Thank you. Next question from Tim Nelson at NPR. Tim writes, you seem to make a distinction between 3-day margin and a 1-week margin of arrival ballots. Are they going to be reported separately?
No, they will not be reported separately. That's a great question. No, they won't. The court told us to segregate the ballots that that arrive after Election Day. Even if they're postmarked on Election Day, if they arrive in today's mail or tomorrow's mail or the mail up to next Tuesday, they're to be segregated. But the court said nothing about how they're to be reported. And so we will continue to do as we had always planned to do, which is report new votes that come in to the totals. A new vote is a new vote is a new vote. And so unless we're told otherwise, we will be adding everything to the new totals.
Okay, thank you. Next question from JJ Perry, Forum News Service. JJ writes, as far as segregating the absentee ballots that come in through the mail now, those come to the counties, correct? And is the plan for those ballots to be segregated at their home counties, or will the state collect those and keep them?
No, great question. No, it'll all be done locally. It'll all be segregated there. We don't handle, store, keep, touch ballots. That will all happen at the county level.
Thank you, Secretary Simon. Next question from Peter Callahan, MinPost. And Peter writes, are the House races you say are within the recount range 6A, 19A, and 33B? Can you
you know, I should have printed it out. I don't have the report in front of me, but David might. It's his report. David, do you know, I don't know if you have it handy, which races those are?
I can pull it up real quickly. I don't have it immediately.
Hold on.
We will circle back as David pulls those, and we'll circle back to that question, sure. Peter. Next, we'll go to Tom Lydon, who writes, what are you hearing about Postal Service delays? Do you know the processing percentage? And just once more, can you go through the number of races by category that are on the bubble for recount range?
Sure, thanks. I don't think we have the final numbers yet on processing times, but anecdotally, I will tell you, I've always made the distinction between the higher ups in Washington, D.C. at the Postal Service who made decisions this summer that did have the effect, no question about it, of delaying postal times. The real question is whether that effect was an intended effect or not, but I don't think there's any question that it did have that effect, intended or otherwise. I make a distinction between those folks and the ones that we deal with in Minnesota, by the way, not just on elections issue, but on business issues, on our Safe at Home program. We have a good relationship with the Postal Service here. I make a distinction because the folks we deal with regularly in Minnesota on all these issues have been great. They have been innovative and thoughtful and attentive and creative. And so I really want to make that distinction. It's an important one. They deserve that distinction. That said, we don't have final numbers. When we get data, we can share that.
You risk I have an answer to Peter's question. It's District 6A, 19A, and 38B.
And I forgot the second part of the last question to talk about the recount report. It's 3 state house contests, 4 county commissioner contests, 1 soil and water supervisor contest, 24 mayoral contests, 75 city council contests, 1 city clerk position, and dozens, many dozens, and many pages worth of town supervisor positions in townships. And again, the ballots that are being processed now and that are coming in by mail could either remove or add contests.
Thank you, Secretary Simon. We now have a question from Sean Toll, Checks and Balances. Sean, feel free to unmute.
Hello, Mr. Secretary. I've received some reports from counties that actually shows the number of absentee ballots and the number of same-day votes. And so that information is coming to your office, and I'm wondering why you will not report out the differences between same-day voters and those that come by absentee ballot.
Sean, it may be that some counties have that information, but others don't. So all I can say is it's data that typically and always comes in on a rolling basis. So as soon as we have it, we'll post it. That's all I can say.
Yes, but the separation between the two to differentiate between the two types. Those that come in as absentee ballot and those that come in as same-day voting.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood your question. You mean the ballots that come in?
Correct.
Way. I see. Yeah, that too is going to take some time. That's an added layer of complexity, meaning those who ordered an absentee ballot to their home, for example, and also sent it along with voter registration materials because they'd either never been registered or they once were, or they are now, but they had a name change or an address change or something like that. Yeah, I believe that's knowable information.
Actually, we're confused. It's the number of votes that were cast by absentee ballot versus the number that were cast by same day ballots. And again, I have two different columns, one for absentee ballot totals, and I have one for the number of those that were same day cast. And the numbers are distinctly different. I mean, 3 times as many absentee ballots came from one of the counties that I have than were same day. That is a significant difference, a trend change. And I actually think that's information that should be made available to the public.
Yeah, David, do you want to say a bit about that?
I think the only thing I can really answer is our reporting system doesn't accommodate that currently. I mean, to do that, we would have to have the counties individually send us a spreadsheet like you're getting from them. And we haven't asked them to do that at this point.
It seems like a public service.
Thank you, David. I have a question from Malia, Kimt Rochester, and Malia writes, Secretary Simon, you mentioned Minnesota is projected to be #1 in voter turnout. And can you explain that? Talk about that a little bit?
No, actually, I said I wasn't sure whether we were going to be. I don't want to comment yet. So no, I have not projected that. I'm saying we could be. We're in the hunt. It depends. I know Colorado is always a strong shower. In fact, I think there was a side bet going on between Senator Klobuchar and I think Senator Bennett of Colorado about who was going to be #1. So we don't know yet. But I will say that everyone seems to abide by Professor McDonald's denominator, the number that he comes up with for all 50 states about eligible voters. That's the denominator. So how many voters voted, and divided by the number of eligible voters, not registered, eligible. Who's 18, who's a citizen, who's a resident, who's not currently serving a felony sentence. And so the McDonald numbers are sort of the gold standard. And that's what we use. And then we just put in the number of people who have voted. So that number, of course, is changing in Minnesota. There will be more today than yesterday, more tomorrow than today. And so the meter is running for a while. So we won't know. And I assume that's the case in several other states as well. But we are poised to do very well and possibly #1. We just don't know yet.
Thank you, Secretary Simon. This would be last call for questions. I'm throwing, there it is. Lonnie Goldsmith, Twin Cities Jew Folk has a question. Feel free to unmute yourself, Lonnie.
Secretary Simon, thanks so much. You had mentioned that the number of absentee ballots that are outstanding won't get to 0 because of people who may have voted yesterday. Can you explain a little bit more how that works, how people might have voted yesterday, even though they had been sent an absentee ballot?
Yeah, and it's not uncommon, particularly this year, I suspect. We'll see that it's definitely not uncommon. People change their mind all the time. So the system will record as having sent a ballot to John Doe, so it's in that number. But he may have had it sitting on his coffee table for days or weeks and then decided, you know what, like the game day polling place experience, it's enough, the weather looks great. I'm going to go in on game day and just leave this on my coffee table. And we wouldn't have a way, at least soon, of tracking that and figuring out. It won't be until weeks later when the numbers are reconciled that we'll be able to deduct him from the 240,000. So that's really what's going on here. I hope that answers your question.
It does. And just a quick follow-up to that, would that also include people who may have sent in their ballot and then gone to the website, seen that it hadn't been received, or will be processed, and then decided to go in anyway and place their vote in person?
Yes, exactly. That's a good example of how that number is in flux.
Cool. Thank you,
Secretary Simon. I am including my contact information one more time, and we will have this recording available. So feel free to shoot me an email. Or you can also text if you would like that link. I'll send it out as soon as we have it. Secretary Simon, the day after Election Day, here we are. Any final words?
Just that Minnesota has a lot to be proud of. High turnout, low conflict, and that's what you want in an election, and that's what Minnesota is known for. So I'm very proud of what we, meaning the entire system, pulled off yesterday, and it's not over. There's more counting to be done, and it will be done. And we want to count every last vote for every last contest in Minnesota.
Well said. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.